The August heat shimmered off the asphalt like waves on a desert ocean, distorting the horizon into a liquid blur. Frank Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he guided his 18-wheeler into the parking lot of the Crossroads gas station, a weathered establishment that had been serving truckers and travelers along Interstate 70 for the better part of 4 decades. The fuel gauge had been flirting with empty for the last 30 miles, and Frank had learned long ago never to push his luck on these lonely stretches of Kansas highway. At 58 years old, Frank had seen just about everything the road had to offer. 32 years behind the wheel of a big rig had taught him to read people, to sense trouble before it arrived, to trust his gut when something felt wrong. His weathered hands, calloused from decades of gripping steering wheels and hauling freight, told the story of a life lived in motion. His salt and pepper beard, trimmed short and neat, framed a face that had been softened by time but hardened by experience. He killed the engine and sat for a moment in the sudden silence, listening to the tick of cooling metal and the distant hum of traffic on the interstate. The air conditioning had been fighting a losing battle against the afternoon sun, and he could feel the heat already seeping through the windows, eager to reclaim its territory. Frank climbed down from the cab, his boots crunching on the gravel as he stretched muscles that had been cramped for too many hours. The gas station looked tired, its paint peeling and its signs faded, but the pumps were functional, and that was all that mattered. A handful of other vehicles dotted the lot, mostly passenger cars with out-of-state plates, families on summer road trips chasing whatever it was people chased when they left home. He was halfway to the fuel pumps when he heard it. A sound that cut through the ambient noise of the highway and the mechanical hum of the station's equipment. A child crying. Not the petulant whine of a kid denied candy at the checkout counter, but something deeper, more desperate. The kind of crying that came from genuine fear. Frank stopped, his eyes scanning the lot until he found the source. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, sat huddled against the side of the building near the restrooms. Her knees were drawn up to her chest, her face buried in her arms, her small shoulders shaking with sobs that seemed too big for her tiny frame. She wore a faded yellow sundress and sandals that looked like they had seen better days. Her brown hair was tangled and dirty, as if it had not been brushed in some time. Frank looked around, expecting to see a frantic parent rushing toward her, but no one came. The other travelers went about their business, pumping gas and checking phones, seemingly oblivious to the distressed child just yards away, or maybe they had noticed and simply chosen not to get involved. That was the way of the world these days, Frank thought. Everyone too busy, too afraid, too wrapped up in their own problems to stop and help. He should have been one of them. He had a schedule to keep, a delivery to make, a boss who did not accept excuses. Getting involved in other people's problems was a good way to complicate your own life. He had learned that lesson more than once over the years, but something in the girl's crying pulled at him, tugged at a part of himself he had tried to bury a long time ago. He thought about his own daughter, about the years he had missed, about the relationship he had let slip away while he was out chasing miles and money. Lisa was grown now, a woman with her own life, and Frank was little more than a stranger who sent birthday cards and called on holidays. Before he could talk himself out of it, Frank changed direction and walked toward the crying child. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her, and stopped a few feet away. "Hey there," he said softly, crouching down to her level. "Are you okay?" The girl's head snapped up, her eyes wide with fear. They were a startling shade of green, red-rimmed and swimming with tears. She pressed herself harder against the wall, as if trying to disappear into the concrete. Frank held up his hands, palms out, showing he meant no harm. "It's all right," he said gently. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just saw you crying and wanted to make sure you're okay. Are you lost? Where are your parents?" The girl did not answer, but her crying subsided slightly as she studied him with wary eyes. Frank could see the calculations happening behind them, the assessment of threat versus safety that no child should have to make. "My name is Frank," he continued, keeping his voice calm and even. "I drive that big truck over there, see it? The blue one with the silver trailer. I've been driving trucks for a long time, longer than you've been alive, I bet. What's your name? A long moment passed before the girl spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Emma. Emma. That's a pretty name. Frank smiled, trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. Are you here with someone, Emma? Your mom or dad? Emma's face crumpled at the mention of parents, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. She shook her head, her tangled hair swaying with the motion. Frank felt his concern deepen. A child alone at a gas station in the middle of Kansas was not a good sign. How did you get here, sweetheart? Emma's lower lip trembled. The man, she whispered. The man brought me here. What man? Frank asked, his protective instincts flaring. Where is he now? He went to get food, Emma said, her voice quavering. He said to wait here and not talk to anyone. But I'm scared. I don't want to go with him anymore. Frank's heart began to pound harder. Something was very wrong here. He had seen enough news stories, heard enough warnings to know what this might mean. He forced himself to remain calm, not wanting to frighten the girl further. Emma, he said carefully, is this man your father? She shook her head emphatically. No, I don't know him. He said he was going to take me to my mommy, but we've been driving for a long time, and I don't think he knows where she is. He keeps making phone calls and getting angry. Frank felt ice form in his stomach. This was worse than he had feared. He looked around the parking lot, searching for anyone who might be the man Emma described, but saw no one paying them any attention. Okay, Emma, Frank said, keeping his voice steady despite the alarm bells ringing in his head. I want you to listen to me very carefully. I'm going to help you, all right? But I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Emma studied his face for a long moment, her green eyes searching for something. Finally, she gave a small nod. Good girl. Now, I want you to come with me into the store. We're going to talk to the lady behind the counter and call the police. They'll help us find your mommy. Does that sound okay? Emma's eyes widened with fresh fear. But he said if I told anyone, something bad would happen to my mommy. Frank's jaw tightened. He said that to scare you, sweetheart. The police can protect your mommy, and they can protect you. The man who brought you here, he's not a good person. Good people don't take little girls away from their families. Do you understand? Emma nodded slowly, and Frank could see the relief beginning to wash over her face. The relief of finally having an adult who believed her, who was willing to help. Frank extended his hand. Come on, let's go inside where it's cool. Emma hesitated for just a moment, then reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were small and trembling, but her grip was surprisingly strong. The grip of a child who desperately needed something to hold on to. They had taken only a few steps toward the store when Frank heard a voice behind them. Hey! What do you think you're doing with that kid? Frank turned to see a man striding toward them across the parking lot. He was maybe 35, with a shaved head and a thick neck that suggested either weightlifting or steroids, possibly both. His face was twisted with anger, his hands balled into fists at his sides. He wore jeans and a tight black t-shirt that showed off muscular arms covered in tattoos. Emma's hand tightened painfully around Frank's fingers, and he could feel her whole body begin to shake. That's him, she whispered, her voice barely audible. That's the man. Frank positioned himself between Emma and the approaching stranger, his body instinctively moving to shield her. Just hold on a second, he said, his voice firm but controlled. Let's all calm down here, calm down. The man's face reddened with rage. You're trying to take my kid, and you want me to calm down. She's not your kid, Frank replied steadily. She told me you're a stranger, that you took her from somewhere. The man's eyes flickered with something, surprise or fear, before his expression hardened again. She's confused. Kids say crazy things. She's my niece. Her mom asked me to watch her for a few days. Emma shook her head frantically behind Frank. He's lying, she said, her voice rising with panic. I never saw him before 3 days ago. He came to our house when Mommy wasn't home. He said Mommy was hurt, and he was going to take me to the hospital to see her, but then we just kept driving and driving. Frank studied the man's face, watching for the tells that every liar eventually displayed. The slight twitch at the corner of his eye. The way his gaze kept shifting, never quite meeting Frank's directly. The thin sheen of sweat that had appeared on his forehead, despite the shade of the gas station overhang. "I think we should let the police sort this out," Frank said calmly. "If she's really your niece, you'll have no problem proving it." The man's demeanor changed instantly, the anger giving way to something more calculating. "Look," he said, his voice dropping to a reasonable tone, "there's no need to involve the cops. This is a family matter. Her mum and I had a disagreement, that's all. I'm just trying to help." Frank did not move. "If it's just a family matter, then you won't mind waiting for the police to confirm that. Should only take a few minutes." The man took a step closer, and Frank felt his muscles tense. He was not a young man anymore, and this stranger had at least 30 pounds of muscle on him, but Frank had been in enough truck stop altercations over the years to know how to handle himself. "You don't want to do this, old man," the stranger said quietly, a threat lurking beneath the surface of his words. "Just walk away. Get in your truck and drive off. Forget you ever saw us." Frank stood his ground. "I'm not going anywhere, and neither is she." For a long moment, neither man moved. The tension stretched between them like a wire about to snap. Emma cowered behind Frank, her small hands clutching the back of his shirt. Then the stranger's eyes shifted to something over Frank's shoulder, and his expression changed. When Frank glanced back, he saw a state trooper's car pulling into the parking lot, the officer inside, scanning the area as he looked for a place to park. The stranger's face went pale. Without another word, he turned and walked quickly toward a white sedan parked near the edge of the lot. Frank watched him go, memorizing the license plate number as the man climbed in and started the engine. Frank called out to the state trooper, waving his free hand to get the officer's attention while keeping Emma safely behind him. The trooper noticed and changed direction, pulling his cruiser to a stop near where Frank stood. The officer stepped out, a tall man in his 40s with a serious face and alert eyes. "What's the situation here?" Frank pointed toward the white sedan, which was now pulling out of the parking lot. "That man just tried to take this little girl. She says he abducted her 3 days ago. She doesn't know him." The trooper's demeanor shifted instantly from casual to focused. He grabbed his radio and called in the license plate, requesting backup and a description of the vehicle. Then he turned his attention to Emma, crouching down to her level much as Frank had done. "Hi there, sweetheart," he said gently. "My name is Officer Martinez. Can you tell me what happened?" Emma looked up at Frank, seeking reassurance. He nodded encouragingly, and she began to tell her story. Her name was Emma Lawson. She was 7 years old. She lived in Denver with her mother, Sarah. 3 days ago, a man had come to their apartment while her mother was at work. Emma had been home with a babysitter, a teenager from down the hall who had stepped out for just a few minutes. The man had told Emma that her mother had been in an accident, that he was a friend who had been sent to take her to the hospital. Emma had been scared and confused, and the man had seemed so certain, so urgent. She had gone with him, believing she would see her mother soon. But then hours had passed, and they just kept driving. When she asked about her mother, the man got angry. When she cried, he told her to shut up. When she asked to call home, he said the phone was broken. She had been trapped in that car for 3 days, sleeping in the back seat, eating fast food when the man remembered to feed her. She did not know where they were going or why. All she knew was that she wanted to go home. As Emma spoke, more police cars arrived, along with an ambulance. The gas station lot transformed into a hive of activity, officers taking statements and paramedics checking Emma for any signs of injury or abuse. Frank gave his own account of what had happened, describing the confrontation with the stranger in as much detail as he could remember. An hour later, Frank sat on the bumper of his truck, exhausted and shaken, but feeling a profound sense of relief. A detective had just informed him that the white sedan had been stopped 40 miles down the interstate. The driver, a man named Vincent Cole, was now in custody. He had a record of prior offenses and was wanted in connection with 2 other child abductions in neighboring states. Emma was going to be okay. Her mother had been contacted and was already on her way, driving through the night to be reunited with her daughter. The terror of the past 3 days would leave scars, certainly, but Emma was alive and safe. That was what mattered. Officer Martinez approached Frank, his expression a mixture of gratitude and respect. "You did a good thing today," he said, extending his hand. "A lot of people would have looked the other way. You saved that little girl's life." Frank shook the officer's hand, but he did not feel like a hero. He felt like a man who had simply done what needed to be done. "Anyone would have helped her," he said. Martinez shook his head. "You'd be surprised. We see a lot of cases where witnesses don't want to get involved. They tell themselves it's not their business, that someone else will handle it. Meanwhile, kids like Emma slip through the cracks. What you did today, it matters. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The officer paused, then added, "We've contacted Emma's mother, Sarah Lawson. She's been out of her mind with worry. Filed a missing persons report the same day Emma disappeared, but these cases take time to work through the system. She's driving here now from Denver, should arrive in about 4 hours." Frank nodded. "Can I wait with Emma until her mother gets here? I don't want her to be alone." Martinez studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I think she'd like that. She keeps asking about you, the trucker who saved her. You made quite an impression." Frank found Emma sitting in the back of an ambulance, wrapped in a blanket despite the summer heat. A female paramedic was checking her vital signs, speaking in soothing tones. When Emma saw Frank approaching, her face lit up. "Frank, you stayed. Of course I stayed." Frank climbed into the ambulance and sat beside her. "I told you I was going to help you, didn't I? That means staying until your mom gets here." Emma leaned against his shoulder, exhaustion evident in every line of her small body. "I was so scared," she whispered. "For 3 whole days, I thought no one would ever find me. I thought I would never see my mommy again." Frank put his arm around her, careful and gentle. "But someone did find you, and you're going to see your mommy very soon. She's on her way right now." "Because you stopped," Emma said. "Because you didn't just walk by like everyone else." Frank thought about all the people who had been at that gas station, all the travelers who had pumped their gas and bought their snacks and never once noticed the frightened child huddled against the wall. He thought about how easily he could have been one of them, how close he had come to minding his own business and driving away. "I almost didn't," he admitted quietly. "I almost kept walking. I had a delivery to make, a schedule to keep. But something about you, about the way you were crying, it made me stop. I'm glad it did." Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My mommy always tells me that there are angels in the world, people who show up when you need them most. I think you're one of those angels, Frank." Frank felt his throat tighten. "I'm no angel, sweetheart. I'm just a truck driver who happened to be in the right place at the right time." "That's what angels are," Emma insisted. "Regular people who do the right thing when it matters." Frank did not know what to say to that, so he just held her, watching the sun sink lower in the sky, waiting for Sarah Lawson to arrive and reclaim her daughter. The hours passed slowly. Emma dozed off and on, waking periodically to make sure Frank was still there. The police came and went, taking statements, making phone calls, coordinating with authorities in Denver and other states. Frank learned more about Vincent Cole, the man who had taken Emma. He had been on the run for weeks, evading capture, leaving a trail of broken families in his wake. Emma was his 3rd victim, but thanks to Frank's intervention, she would be his last. When Sarah Lawson finally arrived, Frank knew her immediately. She had the same green eyes as Emma, though hers were red and swollen from crying. She burst out of her car before it had fully stopped, running toward the ambulance where her daughter waited. "Emma! Oh my God! Emma! Mommy!" They collided in an embrace so fierce it seemed to contain all the fear and relief and love of the past 3 days. Sarah sobbed into her daughter's hair, holding her as if she would never let go. Emma clung to her mother, with equal desperation, finally allowing herself to fully break down now that she was safe. Frank stepped back, giving them space, feeling like an intruder on a moment too private and precious for outsiders. But Emma pulled away from her mother long enough to point at him. "Mommy, that's Frank. He's the one who saved me. He's the one who stopped." Sarah looked at Frank, her face a battlefield of emotions. For a moment, she seemed unable to speak. Then she crossed the distance between them and threw her arms around him, hugging him with the same fierce intensity she had hugged her daughter. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Thank you for bringing my baby back to me. I don't know how I can ever repay you." Frank hugged her back, feeling awkward but also strangely moved. "No repayment necessary," he said. "Just take care of that little girl. She's something special." Sarah pulled back, wiping her eyes. "She is. She really is. And so are you, Frank, whether you believe it or not." After the officer walked away, Frank sat alone with his thoughts. The sun was beginning to set, painting the Kansas sky in shades of orange and purple. His delivery would be late now, and his boss would not be happy. But for the first time in a long time, Frank did not care about schedules or deadlines. He thought about Emma, about the fear in her eyes when she first looked up at him, and the hope that had replaced it when she realized he was going to help. He thought about the man who had taken her, about the darkness that could make a person do such things. He thought about all the other children out there, the ones who had not been as lucky as Emma, the ones whose stories had ended differently. And he thought about Lisa, his daughter, the girl he had watched grow up from a distance, too busy chasing Miles to be the father she deserved. It was too late to change the past, but maybe it was not too late to change the future. The realization hit him with unexpected force. For 32 years, he had been running from responsibility, from commitment, from the terrifying vulnerability of loving someone and being loved in return. He had told himself that the road was his calling, that he was meant for a life of motion and solitude. But sitting in this gas station parking lot, watching a mother reunite with her child, Frank finally understood the truth. He had been afraid of failing as a father, as a husband, as a man. So he had chosen not to try. He had chosen the road because it was safer, easier, less demanding than the messy reality of human connection. Emma had changed that. In a few short hours, she had cracked open something in Frank that had been sealed for decades. She had reminded him what it felt like to be needed, to be trusted, to matter to someone in a real and immediate way. And now he could not go back to the way things were. He could not pretend that the road was enough, that solitude was satisfaction, that running was the same as living. Emma had shown him a different possibility, and he could not unsee it. Frank pulled out his phone and dialed a number he knew by heart but rarely called. It rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. "Dad?" Lisa sounded surprised. "Is everything okay?" Frank smiled, feeling tears prick at the corners of his eyes. "Yeah, honey. Everything's okay. I just wanted to hear your voice. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" There was a pause, and when Lisa spoke again, her voice was softer. "Yeah, Dad. I have time." They talked for an hour, longer than they had talked in years. Frank told her about Emma, about what had happened at the gas station, about the feelings it had stirred up in him. Lisa listened, and then she shared things of her own. Things about her life, her struggles, her hopes, things she had never told him before because he had never seemed interested enough to ask. By the time they hung up, Frank felt like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. A weight he had been carrying for so long, he had forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. The stars were out now, scattered across the Kansas sky like diamonds on black velvet. Frank climbed back into his truck, started the engine, and pulled out of the gas station lot. The road stretched before him, endless and familiar, but somehow different than before. He thought about what Officer Martinez had said, that what he did mattered. Maybe that was true. Maybe one person really could make a difference, even in a world that often seemed too big and too broken to fix. Frank drove through the night, carrying with him the memory of a little girl's grateful smile and the sound of his daughter's voice saying, "I love you, Dad." It was more than enough to keep him going. 3 weeks later, Frank received a letter. It had been forwarded through his trucking company, addressed simply to the truck driver who saved Emma at the Crossroads gas station. The envelope was pink, decorated with stickers of flowers and butterflies. Frank's name was written in careful, childish handwriting, each letter formed with obvious concentration. He sat in his truck at a rest stop in Missouri, turning the envelope over in his hands, feeling a strange nervousness in his chest. He had thought about Emma every day since the gas station, had wondered how she was doing, whether she was healing, whether she remembered him. He had considered reaching out to Sarah, asking for updates, but had talked himself out of it each time. They did not need him intruding on their lives. They were probably trying to move on, to forget the horror of those 3 days. But here was a letter, a pink envelope covered in stickers, addressed to him by name. Frank opened it carefully, as if it contained something fragile and precious. Inside was a handwritten note on lined paper, the letters careful and slightly uneven, clearly written by a child. "Dear Frank," the letter began, "my name is Emma, and you helped me when I was scared. My mommy says you are a hero, but I think you are even better than that. Heroes are in movies and books, but you are real. You stopped when no one else did. You believed me when no one else did. You kept me safe until my mommy could come get me. I'm back home now and I am okay. Sometimes I have bad dreams, but my mommy holds me and tells me that bad men cannot hurt me because there are good men like you in the world. I wanted to say thank you, not just for saving me, but for being the kind of person who saves people. My mommy says the world needs more people like you. I hope you are still driving your big truck. I hope you see lots of beautiful sunsets. I hope you know that you matter. Love, Emma P.S. I drew you a picture. It is you and your truck and me waving goodbye. I hope you like it. P.P.S. My mommy says you can call us if you want. Our number is at the bottom. I would like that very much. Frank unfolded the crayon drawing that had been tucked inside the letter. It showed a blue truck with silver wheels, a tall man with a grey beard standing beside it, and a little girl in a yellow dress waving with one hand while holding what looked like a sun in the other. Above the scene, Emma had written "Thank you" in big, wobbly letters. Frank sat in his truck for a long time, looking at the drawing and reading the letter over and over. He was not a man who cried easily, but tears rolled down his cheeks and into his beard, and he did not try to stop them. He thought about all the choices that had led him to that gas station on that particular day. The route he had taken, the timing of his fuel stop, the moment he had decided to walk toward a crying child instead of away from her. Any one of those choices could have been different, and Emma's story might have ended in tragedy, but they had not been different. He had been there, he had helped, and now a little girl was home safe with her mother, drawing pictures of trucks and sunsets and heroes who were real. Frank carefully folded the letter and the drawing and tucked them into the sun visor above his steering wheel. They would stay there for the rest of his driving days, a reminder of why he did what he did, not just hauling freight from place to place, but being present in the world, being willing to stop, being willing to help. The next time his route took him through Kansas, Frank made a detour to Denver. He had called ahead, nervously arranging a visit with Emma and her mother. He was not sure what to expect, not sure if seeing him would bring back bad memories for the little girl. But when Emma saw him walk through the door of their small apartment, her face lit up with pure joy. She ran across the room and threw herself into his arms, hugging him with all the strength her small body could muster. "Frank! You came! You really came!" Frank hugged her back, feeling his heart swell. "Of course I came. I promised I would, didn't I?" Emma's mother, Sarah, stood nearby, tears streaming down her face. She was younger than Frank had expected, maybe early 30s, with the same green eyes as her daughter. The past few weeks had clearly taken a toll on her, but there was strength in her posture and gratitude in her expression. "I don't know how to thank you," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me back my daughter. You gave me back everything." Frank shook his head. "Emma's the brave one. She's the one who asked for help. I just happened to be there." Sarah crossed the room and embraced him, and Frank found himself hugging her back. They were strangers, connected only by a moment of crisis, but in that embrace was something deeper, the recognition of what might have been and the gratitude for what was. They spent the afternoon together, the three of them. Emma showed Frank her room, her toys, her collection of drawings. Many of them featured trucks and highways and a man with a grey beard. "Frank is my friend," she explained to her mother. "He drives all over the country and sees amazing things. Someday he's going to show me the Grand Canyon." Frank glanced at Sarah, who smiled and nodded. "We've been talking about taking a trip," she said. "When things settle down, Emma wants to see the world beyond this apartment." "You should," Frank said. "There's a lot of beauty out there, a lot of good people too. Sometimes you just have to know where to look." Before he left, Emma presented him with another drawing. This one showed three figures standing together, a tall man, a woman, and a little girl, all holding hands. Above them was a banner that read, "Family." "This is us," Emma explained. "You and me and Mommy. Because you saved me, that makes us family. Right?" Frank looked at the drawing, then at Sarah, then at Emma's hopeful face. His throat tightened with emotion, and when he spoke, his voice was rough. "Right," he said, "that makes us family." He drove away from Denver with the new drawing tucked beside the first one and a promise to return soon. Emma and Sarah stood on the sidewalk and waved until his truck disappeared around the corner. The visit to Denver marked the beginning of something Frank had not expected. As he drove away from Sarah and Emma's apartment, he found himself thinking not about the road ahead, but about the people he was leaving behind. It was an unfamiliar feeling, this pull toward connection rather than away from it. His trucking routes took him across the country in the weeks that followed, through small towns and big cities, across mountains and plains and endless stretches of highway. But no matter where he went, his thoughts kept returning to Denver, to a small apartment filled with crayon drawings, to a little girl who had called him family. He called Emma every few days, short conversations that somehow felt more meaningful than the hours he had spent talking to anyone in years. She told him about school, about her friends, about the therapy sessions she attended twice a week to process what had happened to her. She was making progress, Sarah reported. The nightmares were becoming less frequent. The light was returning to her eyes. Frank found himself marking his calendar, counting the days, until his next route would take him through Colorado. He told himself it was practical, just making efficient use of his time. But deep down, he knew the truth. He missed them. He missed being part of something larger than himself. One evening, about 6 weeks after the incident at the gas station, Frank was parked at a rest stop in Nebraska when his phone rang. It was Sarah. Frank. Her voice was strained, different from the warm tone he had grown accustomed to. "Something's wrong." His heart dropped. "What is it? Is Emma okay?" "She's fine, physically, but she had a really bad nightmare tonight. She's asking for you." "I know it's a lot to ask, but—" "I'm on my way," Frank said without hesitation. "I can be there in 6 hours." He drove through the night, pushing the speed limit as much as he dared, his only thought getting to Emma as quickly as possible. The miles flew by in a blur of headlights and white lines, the familiar rhythm of the road now charged with urgency. He arrived at their apartment just as the sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Sarah opened the door before he could knock, her face pale with exhaustion, but flooding with relief at the sight of him. "She's in her room," Sarah whispered. "She's been asking for you all night." Frank found Emma curled up in her bed, clutching a stuffed rabbit and staring at the wall. When she saw him, her face crumpled and she reached out her arms. "Frank," she sobbed as he gathered her into his embrace. "I dreamed he came back. I dreamed he took me again, and this time no one was there to help me. Frank held her tightly, feeling her small body shake with sobs. I'm here, sweetheart, he murmured. He can't hurt you anymore. He's in jail, remember? He's never going to bother you again. But what if there are others? Emma's voice was muffled against his shoulder. What if there are other bad men? Frank pulled back slightly, looking into her tear-stained face. There are bad people in the world, he admitted gently. That's true, but there are also good people. People who will stop and help when they see someone in trouble. People like the police officer who caught the man who took you. People like your mum, who loves you more than anything. People like me. Emma sniffled. You really came? In the middle of the night? All the way from wherever you were? Of course I came. Frank smoothed her tangled hair back from her face. That's what family does. We show up for each other, no matter what. Emma's eyes searched his face. You really think of me as family? I really do. From the moment you took my hand at that gas station, you became family to me. And family doesn't give up on each other. Ever. Something shifted in Emma's expression, the fear giving way to something stronger. Okay, she said quietly. I believe you. She fell asleep shortly after, exhausted from the night's terrors, but comforted by Frank's presence. He sat beside her bed, watching her breathe, marveling at the strength of this small person who had been through so much. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Thank you, she whispered. I didn't know what else to do. She just kept asking for you. Frank nodded slowly. I'm glad you called. He hesitated, then added, I've been thinking. My routes take me through Denver pretty regularly. Maybe I could stop by more often, if that would help. Sarah's face lit up with hope. That would mean the world to her, to both of us. And so began a new pattern in Frank's life. Every time his routes brought him within a day's drive of Denver, he would make the detour. Sometimes it was just for a few hours, a quick visit to check in and share a meal. Other times he would stay for a day or two, taking Emma to the park or helping Sarah with household repairs that had been neglected for too long. He learned the rhythms of their life. Emma's school schedule, her favorite foods, the specific way she liked her grilled cheese sandwiches cut. He learned that Sarah worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, that she had been struggling to keep everything together since Emma was taken. He learned that they had no family nearby, no one to call in an emergency, no safety net to catch them when they fell. Frank became that safety net, not all at once, but gradually, one visit at a time. He fixed the leaky faucet that had been dripping for months. He helped Emma with her homework when Sarah was working late. He sat in the audience at Emma's school play, cheering louder than anyone when she delivered her 3 lines without forgetting a single word. And somewhere along the way, without quite meaning to, Frank fell in love with this small family that had adopted him. Not romantic love, though he had grown to care deeply for Sarah as a friend. It was something simpler and more profound, the love of a man who had finally found his place in the world. The months that followed brought changes to Frank's life that he never would have anticipated. His relationship with Lisa continued to improve, built on the foundation of honest conversations and genuine effort. She invited him to Seattle for Thanksgiving, and he sat at her table, surrounded by her friends and her fiancé, feeling for the first time like he belonged. He stayed in touch with Emma and Sarah, visiting whenever his routes brought him near Denver. He watched Emma grow and heal, watched her nightmares fade and her confidence return. She started writing him letters regularly, updating him on school and friends and the small adventures of childhood. He wrote back every time, his clumsy handwriting filling pages with stories from the road. Sarah became a friend too, someone he could talk to about things he had never discussed with anyone. The loneliness of life on the road, the regrets he carried, the hope he was finally allowing himself to feel. She listened without judgment and offered her own stories in return. She was rebuilding her life after the trauma, going back to school, working toward a degree that would give her and Emma more stability. Frank found himself thinking about the future in ways he never had before. He was not a young man anymore, and the road was growing harder on his body with each passing year. But for the first time, the idea of slowing down did not fill him with dread. There were people waiting for him now, people who cared if he came home. One evening, about a year after the incident at the gas station, Frank sat on the porch of a small house he had just purchased in Colorado Springs. It was nothing fancy, just a modest two-bedroom with a yard that needed work, but it was his, a place to come home to between hauls. His phone rang, and he smiled when he saw the name on the screen. "Hey, sweetheart," he said. "How was school today?" Emma's voice bubbled with excitement. "Frank, guess what? I got an A on my science project, the one about trucks and how they help people. That's amazing." Frank laughed. "I always knew you were the smartest kid I ever met. Mommy says you're coming to visit next weekend. Is that true?" "It sure is. I've got a few days off, and I thought we could go to the zoo. You mentioned wanting to see the elephants." "Yes." Emma's squeal of delight was loud enough to make Frank pull the phone away from his ear. "I can't wait. I'm going to tell everyone at school that my friend Frank is coming to see me." After they hung up, Frank sat in the gathering dusk, listening to the crickets and watching the stars emerge one by one. He thought about the long road that had brought him here, all the miles and years and choices. He thought about the day at the gas station, the crying child, the moment when he decided to get involved instead of walking away. That decision had changed everything, not just for Emma, but for him. It had cracked open something inside him, something that had been sealed away for too long. It had reminded him that connection was not a weakness, that caring about others did not make you vulnerable, that opening your heart was the bravest thing a person could do. He was still a truck driver. He still loved the open road, the sunrises over mountains, the satisfaction of a long haul completed, but the road was no longer his whole life. It was a part of his life, balanced now with relationships and responsibilities and love. Lisa was getting married in the spring. She had asked Frank to walk her down the aisle, and he had said yes with tears in his eyes. It would be the proudest moment of his life, he knew, the moment when he finally became the father she deserved. Emma had announced that when she grew up, she wanted to drive a truck just like Frank. Sarah had laughed and said they would see, but Frank had promised to teach her everything he knew when she was old enough. She would be a great trucker, he told her, the best on the road. Frank Morrison had spent most of his life running from responsibility, from connection, from the fear of letting people down. But a crying child at a gas station had stopped him in his tracks, had forced him to confront the man he had become and the man he wanted to be. He was not running anymore. He was home. The decision to buy the house in Colorado Springs had not been an easy one. Frank had lived his entire adult life on the road, accumulating possessions that fit in a duffel bag and relationships that rarely lasted longer than a fuel stop. The idea of putting down roots, of having a permanent address that was not his trucking company's headquarters, felt foreign and frightening. But Emma had asked him one afternoon as they walked through a park in Denver where he lived when he was not driving. Frank had realized he did not have a good answer. A hotel room here, a truck stop there, wherever his rig happened to be parked. "That's sad," Emma had said with the brutal honesty of childhood. "Everyone should have a home, a place where they keep their stuff and their memories and their people." Her words had stayed with Frank for weeks afterward. He had started paying attention to the towns he passed through, imagining what it might be like to stop in one of them, to have a mailbox with his name on it, to know his neighbors, to plant a garden and watch it grow. Colorado Springs had called to him from the first time he drove through it. The mountains rising in the distance, the clear blue sky, the sense of space and possibility that reminded him of the open road, but felt somehow more permanent, more real. He'd found the little house through a retired trucker he had known for years, a man named Walter who had settled in Colorado Springs after decades behind the wheel. Walter had shown him around town, introduced him to the community, helped him understand what it meant to put down roots after a lifetime of motion. "This is the hard part," Walter had told him one evening, as they sat on his porch drinking beer and watching the sunset. "The driving, that's easy. Anyone can do that. But learning how to stay in one place, how to build something that lasts, that takes real courage." Frank had thought about those words as he signed the papers for his house, as he moved in his few possessions, as he stood in the empty rooms and wondered what to do next. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was exactly what he needed. The house filled up slowly, one piece at a time, a couch from a thrift store, a bed that was actually comfortable instead of the narrow mattress in his truck's sleeper cab, pictures on the walls, most of them given to him by Emma, childish drawings that made the place feel like home. Sarah helped him pick out curtains and dishes, practical things that Frank had never thought about before. She had a good eye for design, for making spaces feel warm and welcoming. Under her guidance, the little house transformed from a structure into a sanctuary. Emma designated one corner of the guest room as her space for when she visited. She arranged her drawings on the wall and left a few toys in the closet, small claims of territory that filled Frank with unexpected joy. She was marking this place as hers, as part of her world. He could not imagine a greater compliment. 2 years later, Frank stood at the altar of a small church in Seattle, watching his daughter walk toward him in a white dress. She was beautiful, radiant with happiness, and Frank felt his heart might burst with pride and love. The journey to this moment had been long and difficult. After that first phone call from the gas station, Frank and Lisa had begun the slow process of rebuilding their relationship. It had not been easy. There were years of hurt to work through, disappointments to acknowledge, apologies to make. Lisa had been angry at first, and she had every right to be. Frank had missed her childhood, her adolescence, her young adulthood. He had been a ghost of a father, more absent than present, more focused on the next load than on his own daughter's life. "I used to wait for you," Lisa had told him during one of their early conversations. "Every birthday, every Christmas, every school event. I would look at the door and wait for you to walk through it, and you almost never did." Frank had listened to her words, feeling each one like a knife to his heart. He had not defended himself, had not made excuses. He had simply acknowledged the truth of what she was saying and asked if there was any way he could make amends. The process had been gradual, phone calls that grew longer and more frequent, video chats where they could see each other's faces, a visit to Seattle where Frank had met Lisa's fiancé, a kind man named David who worked as an architect and clearly adored Frank's daughter. David had pulled Frank aside during that first visit. "She talks about you a lot, you know," he had said, "about how much she wanted you to be there when she was growing up. But she also talks about how brave it was for you to reach out now, to try to fix things. That takes a lot of courage." Frank had not felt courageous. He had felt desperate, terrified that he had left it too late, that Lisa would never forgive him for all the years he had wasted. But slowly, tentatively, a new relationship had begun to form. Lisa had been fascinated by Emma's story. She had asked Frank to tell it again and again, the details of that day at the gas station, the confrontation with Vincent Cole, the moment when Emma had taken his hand and trusted him to keep her safe. "That's not the dad I remember," Lisa had said one evening, her voice thoughtful. "The dad I remember wouldn't have stopped. He would have been too worried about his delivery schedule, about getting into trouble, about anything that might complicate his life." Frank had nodded slowly. "You're right. That's who I used to be. But Emma changed something in me. She made me realize that schedules and deadlines don't matter nearly as much as people do. I should have learned that lesson a long time ago. I should have learned it with you." Lisa had been quiet for a long moment. Then she had said, "Well, you're learning it now. That's what matters." The wedding invitation had arrived 3 months later. Lisa wanted Frank to walk her down the aisle. She wanted him to be part of the most important day of her life. It was more than he had dared to hope for, more than he deserved. When she reached him, Lisa took his arm and whispered, "Thank you, Dad, for being here, for everything." Frank squeezed her hand. "Thank you for giving me another chance." They walked together toward the front of the church, toward the young man who would become Lisa's husband, toward the future that was unfolding before them. Frank thought about all the roads he had traveled to reach this moment, all the choices and changes and second chances, and he thought about Emma. She was here today, sitting in a pew with Sarah, wearing a flower girl dress and beaming with excitement. She had insisted on coming, had told Frank that this was a family event and she was family. She was right. She was family. They all were, this strange and beautiful collection of people, brought together by fate and choice and love. After the ceremony, during the reception, Emma tugged on Frank's sleeve. "Frank," she said seriously, her green eyes wide, "I've been thinking." "Oh yeah? About what?" "About what I want to be when I grow up. I don't think I want to drive a truck anymore." Frank raised an eyebrow. "No? What changed your mind?" "I want to help people," Emma said, "like you helped me. I want to find the kids who are scared and make sure they're okay. I want to be the person who stops." Frank felt his eyes grow moist. He crouched down to Emma's level, looking into the face of the little girl who had changed his life. "Emma," he said softly, "you're already that person. You always have been." She smiled, that brilliant smile that had first appeared through her tears at a gas station in Kansas. Then she hugged him, and Frank hugged her back, and in that moment, everything was perfect. The years continued to pass, as years do. Frank gradually reduced his driving schedule, taking fewer hauls and spending more time in Colorado Springs. His little house became a home, filled with photographs and memories and the evidence of a life well lived. Lisa had 2 children, a boy and a girl, and Frank discovered that being a grandfather was the greatest joy he had ever known. He taught them about trucks and highways, about the importance of helping others, about the beauty of the world beyond their doorstep. Emma grew into a remarkable young woman. She graduated from high school with honors and went on to study social work in college. She never forgot the man who had saved her, the truck driver who had stopped when no one else would. She visited him regularly, called him on holidays, sent him pictures of her accomplishments. The years between the gas station and her graduation had been a journey of healing and growth. Emma had struggled, especially in the beginning. The nightmares had persisted for months, sometimes years. There were days when she could not leave the apartment, days when the fear was too overwhelming to face. But she had persevered. With Sarah's unwavering support, with Frank's steady presence, with the help of therapists and teachers and friends, Emma had slowly rebuilt her sense of safety in the world. She had learned that not all strangers were dangerous, that asking for help was not a weakness, that the darkness she had experienced did not define her future. Middle school had been challenging. Emma had been quieter than her peers, more cautious, less willing to take the social risks that came naturally to other kids her age. She had been bullied once, briefly, by a group of girls who sensed her vulnerability, but Emma had stood up to them with a courage that surprised everyone, including herself. "You don't know anything about me," she had told them, her voice shaking but determined. "You don't know what I've survived. I'm not afraid of you." The bullying had stopped after that, and something had shifted in Emma's understanding of herself. She was not a victim. She was a survivor. There was a difference, and it mattered. High school had been better. Emma had found her voice, found her people, found a sense of purpose that gave direction to her life. She had joined the peer counseling program, spending her free periods listening to other students talk about their problems. She had volunteered at a local shelter, helping families who had lost everything start over again. "I know what it feels like to be scared and alone," she had told Frank once. "I know what it feels like to think no one will help you. I want to make sure other kids know they're not alone, that there are people who care." Frank had listened to her words and felt a pride so deep it brought tears to his eyes. This was what she had made of her trauma. Not bitterness, not fear, but compassion. A determination to turn her pain into purpose. Her college application essay had told her story, the day she was taken. The fear of those 3 days in a stranger's car. The miracle of Frank stopping to help her. And the journey afterward, the long road to healing and the discovery of her calling. The essay had moved admissions officers to tears. Emma had received scholarship offers from multiple schools, including a prestigious social work program that accepted only a handful of students each year. She had chosen to stay close to home, to be near Sarah and Frank, but she had dreamed big and worked hard and built a future from the ashes of her worst nightmare. When Frank turned 70, Emma and Sarah threw him a party. Lisa flew in from Seattle with her family. Old trucking buddies came from across the country. The little house in Colorado Springs was filled with laughter and stories and the warmth of genuine connection. During the party, Emma stood up to make a toast. She was 20 now, confident and kind, with the same green eyes that had first captured Frank's attention at a gas station so many years ago. 13 years ago, she began, I was a scared little girl, crying in a parking lot, wondering if anyone would ever help me. And then this man walked up to me. This grumpy, wonderful, big-hearted man who could have kept walking but chose to stop. He could have minded his own business, but he made me his business. He saved my life that day, and he's been saving it ever since. She paused, her voice thick with emotion. Frank taught me that heroes don't wear capes. They drive trucks. They have gray beards and calloused hands. They show up when you need them, even when it's inconvenient. They believe you when no one else does. They fight for you when you can't fight for yourself. Emma raised her glass. To Frank Morrison, the best man I've ever known, the father I chose. I love you. The room erupted in applause and cheers. Frank sat in his chair, tears streaming down his face, surrounded by the family he had found in the most unexpected ways. After the party, when the guests had gone and the house was quiet, Frank sat on his porch and looked up at the stars. He thought about all the roads he had traveled, all the choices he had made, all the moments that had brought him to this place. He thought about the crying child at the gas station, the moment when everything changed, the decision to stop, to help, to care. Such a small thing, really, such a simple choice, but it had changed everything. It had given him Emma and Sarah. It had given him back Lisa. It had given him a reason to stop running and a reason to come home. Frank smiled and closed his eyes, listening to the crickets and the distant sound of traffic on the highway. The road was still out there, calling to him as it always had, but he did not need to answer it anymore. He had found what he was looking for. He had found his place in the world. He had found his family. And that was more than enough. The next morning Frank woke early and made himself a cup of coffee. He sat on the porch as the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. It was going to be a beautiful day. His phone buzzed with a message from Emma. Good morning, Frank. Can't wait to see you this weekend. Love you to the moon and back. Frank typed a reply. Love you too, sweetheart. More than all the miles I've ever driven. He put down the phone and sipped his coffee, watching the world wake up around him. Somewhere out there, on the highways and back roads of America, other truckers were starting their days, climbing into their cabs and pointing their rigs toward distant horizons. Frank hoped that if any of them saw a crying child at a gas station, they would stop. They would help. They would be the person who made a difference, because that was what it was all about, really. Not the miles you drove or the loads you hauled, not the money you made or the deadlines you met. What mattered was the people you helped along the way, the lives you touched, the moments when you chose to stop instead of keep going. Frank Morrison had learned that lesson late in life, but he had learned it well. And now, in the twilight of his years, he knew with absolute certainty that he had made the right choices, the important ones anyway. He finished his coffee and went inside to shower and dress. There was a lot of living left to do, and he intended to do it well. For Emma, for Lisa, for all the people who had given him second chances, for himself. The road was still out there, and sometimes Frank still drove it. But now he always had somewhere to come home to, and that made all the difference. The trucker who saw a crying child at a gas station and decided to help. That was how Emma always introduced him. That was how she had told the story 100 times, to friends and classmates and colleagues and strangers. And every time she told it, Frank felt the same mix of humility and pride. He had just done what needed to be done. Anyone would have helped. But that was not true, and he knew it. Not everyone stopped. Not everyone helped. Not everyone was willing to get involved, to take a risk, to put themselves on the line for a stranger. He had been that person. He had stopped. He had helped, and it had changed everything for both of them. The years after Emma's book was published brought a new dimension to Frank's life. He was recognized now, approached by strangers in truck stops and restaurants who wanted to shake his hand and thank him for his courage. It made him uncomfortable at first, this sudden visibility after decades of anonymity. But gradually he learned to accept it, not for himself, but for what it represented. Every person who stopped to talk to him was someone who'd been touched by Emma's story, someone who might now be more willing to help a stranger in need. That was worth any amount of personal discomfort. Frank began speaking at schools and community events, sharing his story and encouraging others to pay attention to the world around them. He was not a polished speaker, his words sometimes stumbling and his hands always fidgeting, but there was an authenticity to his message that resonated with audiences. "I'm not special," he would say. "I'm just a truck driver who happened to be in the right place at the right time. The special thing was the choice to stop, and that's a choice any of you can make. Every day you have opportunities to help someone. Most of them aren't as dramatic as what happened to me, but they matter just as much." He would tell stories about the small kindnesses he had witnessed in his years on the road. Truckers pooling money to help a colleague whose truck had broken down. Waitresses comping meals for families who clearly could not afford them. Strangers helping strangers change flat tires, giving directions, offering a kind word to someone who looked like they were having a hard day. "The world is full of these moments," Frank would say. "Most of them never make the news. Most of them are never acknowledged at all, but they add up. They build something, a web of connection that holds us all together. Every time you help someone, you make that web a little stronger." His audiences would listen rapt, and Frank would see something shift in their faces. Recognition, maybe, or determination. The realization that they, too, had the power to make a difference. After one such speaking engagement at a high school in Oklahoma City, a teenage girl had approached him with tears in her eyes. She had told him that she had been planning to run away from home that night, that she had felt invisible and worthless and forgotten. But hearing his story had changed her mind. If a stranger at a gas station could care about Emma, she had said, "Maybe someone out there cares about me too. Maybe I should give them a chance to show it." Frank had talked with her for a long time, had connected her with a counselor at the school, had followed up in the weeks that followed to make sure she was getting the help she needed. She had been one of many over the years, young people who saw in his story a reason to hope, a reason to keep going, a reason to believe that the world was not as cruel and indifferent as it sometimes seemed. These moments became the unexpected gift of his later years, the chance to turn his one act of courage into a ripple that spread outward, touching lives he would never meet, making differences he would never see. It was more than he had ever hoped for, more than he had ever imagined when he walked toward a crying child at a gas station in Kansas. Frank Morrison continued to drive for another 5 years after that birthday party. He watched Lisa's children grow from babies to toddlers to bright, curious kids who called him Grandpa Frank and begged him for stories about the road. He watched Emma graduate from college and start her career as a child advocate, fighting for kids who had no one else to fight for them. He watched Sarah find love again with a kind man who treated her and Emma like the treasures they were. He was there for all of it, present, engaged, loving. When Frank finally retired at 75, he did not feel lost or purposeless like so many of his fellow truckers who had given up the road. He had too much to do, too many people to see, too much life to live. His little house in Colorado Springs became a gathering place for family and friends. Lisa brought her children for summers, and Frank taught them to fish and garden and appreciate the simple pleasures of life. Emma visited every chance she got, bringing stories of the children she had helped and the difference she was making in the world. One afternoon, about a year after his retirement, Frank sat on his porch with Emma. She was 22 now, beautiful and confident, with a wisdom in her eyes that belied her young age. They watched the sunset together, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple that reminded Frank of that first evening in Kansas. "Can I ask you something?" Emma said. "Anything. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that day, if you had just kept walking?" Frank thought about the question for a long moment. He had wondered about it many times. The road not taken, the choice that could have gone differently. Sometimes, he admitted, but I try not to dwell on it. Life's too short for that. What matters is what actually happened. I did stop. I did help. And here we are. Emma nodded, her green eyes thoughtful. I think about it too, about how close I came to something terrible. And then I think about you walking toward me when everyone else walked by. You changed my whole life in that moment, Frank. You gave me a future. Frank reached over and took her hand. You changed my life too, Emma. You gave me back my family. You taught me that it's never too late to start over. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge. The crickets sang their evening song, and the world settled into the quiet peace of nightfall. "Frank," Emma said eventually, "I'm going to write a book about what happened to me and about you, about how one person can make a difference if they're willing to stop and help. I want other people to read it and maybe be inspired to do the same." Frank smiled. "That sounds wonderful. Just make sure you get my good side." Emma laughed, a sound that still filled Frank's heart with joy after all these years. "You don't have a bad side," she said, and she meant it. The book was published 2 years later. Emma titled it The Man Who Stopped, and it became a bestseller. People across the country read about the trucker who saw a crying child at a gas station and decided to help. They read about how that simple act of kindness had rippled outward, touching lives and inspiring others to do the same. Frank was embarrassed by all the attention at first. He had never wanted to be famous. He had just wanted to do the right thing. But as the letters began to pour in, letters from people who had read Emma's book and been moved to action, he began to understand the power of their story. One letter came from a woman in Ohio who had found a lost child at a shopping mall. She had thought about walking by, about letting someone else handle it, but then she had remembered the trucker in Emma's book. She had stopped. She had helped, and the child had been reunited with his frantic parents. Another letter came from a man in Texas who had noticed an elderly neighbor struggling with groceries. He had been in a hurry, late for an appointment, but something had made him stop. He had helped the woman carry her bags inside and discovered she had been alone for 3 days, too proud to ask for assistance. He had checked on her every day since then. They had become friends. There were hundreds of letters like these, thousands eventually, stories of people who had stopped, who had helped, who had chosen to get involved instead of walking away. Frank read every single one, and with each letter he felt a profound sense of purpose. His life had mattered, not because of the miles he had driven or the loads he had hauled, but because of the moment he had chosen to walk toward a crying child instead of away from her. That was his legacy. That was his gift to the world. When Frank passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82, he was surrounded by everyone he loved. Lisa held one hand, Emma held the other. Sarah and the grandchildren stood nearby, their faces wet with tears, but their hearts full of gratitude. He went quietly, with a smile on his lips, knowing that his life had mattered, knowing that he had made a difference, knowing that he was loved. The funeral was a celebration of his life, filled with stories and laughter and tears. Truckers came from across the country to pay their respects. Their rigs lined up outside the church like an honor guard. Lisa spoke about the father who had finally come home to her. Emma spoke about the stranger who had become her hero. And at the end of the service, as Frank's casket was carried out into the sunlight, a little girl in the front row tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mommy," she whispered, "that's the man from the story, right? The truck driver who saved Grandma Emma?" Sarah smiled through her tears and nodded. "That's right, sweetheart. That's Frank. He was a very special man." The little girl thought about this for a moment. Then she said, "I want to be like him when I grow up. I want to help people." Sarah hugged her daughter close. "You already are, baby. Just like your grandmother. Just like Frank." The procession moved out into the parking lot where dozens of trucks had gathered. As the hearse pulled away, the truckers began to sound their horns, a thunderous tribute that echoed across the landscape. And somewhere Frank Morrison smiled. He had finally found his way home, and along the way, he had helped others find their way too. That was his legacy, that was his gift. A truck driver who saw a crying child at a gas station and decided to help. And in that moment, everything changed. For all of them. Forever. Years after Frank's passing, his legacy continued to grow. Emma's book remained in print, assigned reading in schools across the country. A documentary was made about his life, featuring interviews with Lisa, Sarah, and the many people whose lives he had touched. A scholarship fund was established in his name, supporting children who had survived trauma and wanted to pursue careers in helping others, but the truest measure of his impact could not be quantified. It lived in the countless moments when someone chose to stop instead of walk by, to help instead of ignore, to reach out instead of turn away. It lived in the ripples that spread outward from that single act of kindness at a gas station in Kansas, touching lives that Frank would never know, changing futures that he would never see. Emma continued her work as a child advocate, eventually founding a non-profit organization dedicated to helping trafficking survivors rebuild their lives. She named it Frank's Light, in honor of the man who had seen her when no one else was looking, who had believed her when it mattered most, who had taught her that one person really could make a difference. She thought about him every day, when she walked into courtrooms to advocate for children who had no one else to speak for them, when she held the hands of survivors and told them they were not alone, when she looked at her own children and marveled at the family she had built from the ruins of her worst nightmare. Frank had given her that, not just her life, but her purpose, her understanding of what it meant to be human, to be connected, to be responsible for one another. And somewhere, in whatever came after, Emma believed that Frank knew, that he could see the light that had spread from his one moment of courage, illuminating corners of the world he had never imagined reaching. The truck driver who saw a crying child at a gas station and decided to help. That was who he was. That was who he would always be. And his story would continue to inspire, to challenge, to transform. For as long as there were people willing to listen, for as long as there were people willing to stop, for as long as there were people willing to help, that was Frank Morrison's gift to the world. That was his forever. In the end, Frank Morrison's story was not about the miles he had driven or the loads he had hauled. It was not about the schedules he had kept or the deadlines he had met. It was about a single moment of choice, a fraction of a second when he decided to walk toward a crying child instead of away from her. That moment had defined everything that came after. It had given him Emma and Sarah, had reconnected him with Lisa, had taught him what it meant to be part of a family. It had shown him that the road, for all its beauty and freedom, was not enough. That human beings were meant for connection, for community, for love. And it had proven something that Frank had stopped believing a long time ago, that one person could make a difference. That kindness mattered, that the world, despite all its darkness, was full of light waiting to be discovered. Frank Morrison was that light for Emma Lawson, and Emma, in turn, became that light for countless others. The ripples spread outward, touching lives neither of them would ever know, making differences neither of them could measure. That was the power of stopping, the power of helping, the power of choosing to see the person in front of you and deciding that they mattered. Frank had learned that lesson late in life, but he had learned it well, and his story would continue to teach it long after he was gone to everyone who heard it and was moved to make the same choice, to stop, to help, to be the person who makes a difference. That was Frank Morrison's gift. That was his legacy. That was forever. The story of Frank Morrison and Emma Lawson became something larger than either of them could have imagined. It was told in classrooms and community centers, in churches and truck stops, wherever people gathered to remind themselves that goodness still existed in the world. Teachers used it to explain the importance of speaking up when something was wrong. Parents used it to teach their children about stranger danger, and also about the good strangers who could help in times of crisis. Trucking companies used it in their training programs, encouraging drivers to be aware of their surroundings and to trust their instincts when something seemed off. But the story was more than a teaching tool. It was a testament to the power of human connection, to the idea that we are all responsible for one another, that the suffering of a stranger is not something to be ignored, but something to be addressed. Frank had not set out to become a symbol. He had simply done what felt right in the moment. But that single act of rightness had created ripples that would continue to spread for generations. Emma carried those ripples forward in her work. Every child she helped, every family she supported, every system she changed was a continuation of what Frank had started at that gas station in Kansas. She was his legacy in the most profound sense, a living embodiment of the difference one person could make. And she made sure that everyone knew where it had begun, with a truck driver who saw a crying child and decided to help. With a moment of courage that had changed everything. That was the truth Frank Morrison had discovered in the twilight of his life. That courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. That heroism was not about grand gestures, but about small choices made in moments when no one was watching. That love was not a feeling, but a verb, an action, a commitment to show up for the people who needed you. He had learned these lessons late, but he had learned them well. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The truck driver who saw a crying child at a gas station and decided to help. That was who Frank Morrison was. That was who he would always be. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.